Whoa. You guys heard that?
I did. I'm very impressed. Now I've got to change my voice to match.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard it.
All right, I'm going to switch to share my screen. Oh, shoot. Did I send that link to Jim Brett? Okay, let me share this.
You're live streaming to YouTube?
Yeah. Yeah, and then
I'm really curious to see how this works.
Yeah, well, I think we've done it before, Dustin, when we've had like Noisebridge Philosophy Guild chats like a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, okay.
Where I put
that was also live streamed?
What?
That was also live streamed?
I think one of them was, because I was still trying to figure out the technology.
Yeah. Now I'm really fascinated and curious to see how this looks and works. I've been thinking about the sort of spaces you've been putting together and a few other folks as well. Like, I really like this format and want to encourage it to be more comfortable for people and easier to navigate and less like Facebook event focused, such that, you could like say, hey, you know what? I feel like having people over today. I'm just going to pop up my meeting, and then somehow through the app Ether, people see in their friends list, oh, Naomi's hosting a live stream, and oh, so-and-so is too. And, these 3 other spots are, and this is what's available to pop into.
Yeah, sometimes there are some real traffic jams with all that stuff.
Yeah. And rather than having like a traditional formal invitation thing, I want to be able to see it happen casually and organically, so that I see, oh, Naomi's got a chat going. She's got 2 people in it, and it looks like it's an open chat. Cool. I can go hang out in there. Oh, wait, she's got 12 people in there. Now there's a lot going on there. I'll check out somebody else's.
Yeah. Oh, there it is. Okay, cool. I forgot I put it in Safari. Can you guys see that?
I see a gray screen.
What do you see?
Nothing.
Nothing? You don't see slides or anything?
It is giving me an icon of your monitor, and I think your voice is pulsing to it, but I don't think that it's either trying to load. No, it's not trying to even load any slides. No.
Okay. Sorry, hang on a second.
You came back.
What I'm going to do is do that, and then I will share it. Chrome tab. Thanks for bearing with me.
Oh, no worries. I'm just appreciating the camera framing. Right now it says Naomi the World.
Cool.
Now I got your slides.
Okay, cool. Okay. So especially since this is live streaming, I'm going to give you guys I gave a 10-minute talk back in December called The Importance of Conflict. And it inspired a couple of different interesting conversations. And I just, I wanted to resume that, especially because with all these conversations going virtual lately, people are I've been watching them kind of fall into the same patterns of, getting into conflicts about what is important to do right now. And then some people kind of dropping off the map because they're like, okay, well, it's not really worth being here anymore. And so all these virtual communities, I mean, this is happening all the time. And
yeah.
I talk about this in the talk a little bit, but anyway, it's a very quick talk. It's very rapid fire. So I'm just going to kind of go through it really quick, and then we can talk more. Okay. So I see conflict as an opportunity. And the only way that you can make use of that opportunity is if you have the courage to stick with uncomfortable feelings. So that's what this talk is about. It's about not demonizing things like anger or our argumentation and things like that. A lot of things that people, especially on the left coast, as we say, like to say are problematic behaviors. So just a really super quick background. I've been helping manage an anarchist hackerspace for over 10 years. I guess it's like 11 years at this point. And when I say helping manage, It really just means I'm usually on the forefront of, or like getting in front of the sorts of like community cultural issues that our hackerspace has had, and that a lot of hackerspaces have, and that what I found out was most communities are having these problems. And the fact that we are anarchists means that we're usually on the forefront of those sorts of problems. So that's what keeps me kind of interested in it. I've also played the role of like professional community manager in a couple of different businesses, including the one that I'm in now. Like I'm this professional engineering liaison to our open source community at Streamlit. So I don't like to read slides, but myths about conflict. This one's really quick. So, you don't get anything out of avoiding conflict. And you don't get anything out of just kind of trying to wait until things go away. The reason that we don't like conflicts is that it feels bad. Conflict, the history of the word itself, we've used conflict to mean like a war between, two factions or whatever. And we know that conflict in the form of violence leads to PTSD, and we really don't like the idea of causing harm to people, to our credit, generally speaking. So conflict feels like doing bad things to each other. So, and the thing is that the more that we care about each other, the more disturbing the conflict feels, because so much is at stake. But what I believe is that conflict has always been an instrument for social good, and that you can only increase diversity through conflict. So if you try to assert that time heals all wounds, you will run into problems. Time does not heal anything. Like if you get shot in the side and you're bleeding to death and you think time heals everything, I think I'll just wait this one out. No, it's going to get nasty and gangrenous, and the limb might fall off and whatever. Time does not heal that wound. If time healed everything, you could just sit in the waiting room and say, I don't need to see a doctor. I'll just sit here for 12 hours and my flu will be gone. So here's another thing. Let's say you get a couple of people of color into your community for the first time. So you think over time, great. Like we've got those couple of people in there, and over time we'll get more, right? We've solved that diversity issue. Actually, what happens is that the emotional burden of discussion around differences just falls on those people who are different, they leave, generally speaking. So you do not solve the diversity issue by just getting those like couple of token people in there. You just kind of shifted the conflict around those differences onto certain people. So you have to deal with conflict intentionally. So most conflict, I believe, can be healthy and can produce good things. Conflict can obviously be toxic. Conflict can worsen decision making, but it can also better it. The thing is, so I was hoping that a couple of people from Game B would jump in here, and I'm curious as to why several people from Game B said that they would come and then no one did. I was going to talk about...
It's very Game B of them.
Because, very Game A orientation is win-lose negotiations, or like lose-lose to conflicts. Like I don't care what happens here as long as somebody loses something. So, which is almost guaranteed to make everybody lose, because everybody gets hurt in this situation. As you can see, Mega Shark does not really come out ahead of Giant Octopus, and I think all that happens to Giant Octopus in this movie is he sinks into the ocean and runs away. Well, we've lost everything in the conflict between Mega Shark and Giant Octopus. So mediation is sometimes called for. Like sometimes it might seem that Mega Shark and Giant Octopus are just two monsters with a perverse love of making trouble, but maybe they're the only two creatures around who are willing to air their disagreements, which is something that I think a lot of people who are interested in getting to the forefront of an argument, or who are not conflict averse, are probably willing to say. However, the thing that most people don't recognize is that they're often pushing away a lot of the people who have just kind of had it, and you won't hear from those people, and those will often be the highly diverse voices. And over time, you experience attrition in your community, and what you're left with is a bunch of people who like to argue, and that's not the representation of your community, or the one that you wanted anyway. So lots of people have different strategies for dealing with threats. There's this, here's this cartoon. Another type of animal that I think about is the sea otter, the person who is only around when the environment is good. So you will generally speaking lose the people who show up the most and make like the most creative and the most happy and things like that. You will generally lose those people first in a conflict. And so if you don't sort of like deal with it and get to it head on, you often lose a lot of those people that made the community special, like pretty quickly, actually. But the thing is, you'll lose them silently. They won't show up to fight, is the point. So being human is about making conscious choices. So unlike all these like animal archetypes that I'm talking about, like the point of being human is that we can choose what outcomes we want. Like, and in the wake of maybe bad decisions or bad experiences, we get to choose what our experiences mean to us. That is the gist of humanity itself. Somebody made the conscious choice to make a Dune pain box. It's just pretty amazing. So pain is at its root like something about your nervous system. So it's been shown in many different psychological studies, neurological studies, that you experience emotional pain using all the same pathways that you do when you're experiencing physical pain. So when people say like, yeah, that was a very painful conflict for me, like you should really take that at face value. And we have to understand that when we're dealing with conflict in the community, that sometimes we actually have to choose to experience the discomfort so that we are also choosing not to experience the worst pain later. And so this is why I think it's important to sometimes embrace uncomfortable feelings, because another thing is that your nervous system sort of gets trained to route around damage. So here's this parable of routing around damage. So like this was my broken toilet seat. And for weeks and weeks and weeks, we didn't fix the broken toilet seat. So every time I sat down, I was sort of hesitating for a little bit and wiggling. Like this part of the talk is much more effective in person because I'm making all sorts of hilarious gestures about trying to sit on a toilet. But I would, it was my attempt to route around the damage. Basically, there was this damage. There was a broken stair, as you might hear in communities, and trying to sit on this toilet. And I invented all these different sort of like machinations and like gyrations to sort of work around the fact that the toilet seat was slipping out from under me every time I tried to sit on it. And why did we wait so long? I don't know. I was actually avoiding a conflict with my landlord. I did not want to talk to her. The root cause of all these different things that I was doing with my body to route around the damage of this was really, the root cause was I was avoiding talking to my landlord. And again, sometimes it's better to just get in front of these things. So there are better questions to ask in a conflict that, this also assumes that you have noticed that you're in one, which a lot of people don't quite notice. And that's actually a big thing that I'd love to discuss with you after I finish this. It's almost over. So, good questions to ask people, as opposed to just try to dive in and solve the problem or figure out who's right. Are these questions on the right? So tell me more about what comes up for you when we talk about this. It would really help me get behind your idea if you would tell me more about these things. Letting people know that they're heard. Let me see if I understand what you're saying. Tell them, mirror back to them. Engage those mirror neurons. I think that even works in a virtual environment. And if you're really trying to get people to understand, and you really think that they're they're making a wrong decision here, or they've got the wrong idea. Like, try to get them to think, like, what do you think the unintended consequences of taking X, Y, and Z actions would be? But basically demonstrating that you at least want to understand and that you are interested in hearing about other people's feelings. What you're going to get is other people's mirror neurons being willing to act as well, and they will start asking you questions. How do you feel about this issue, and so on. And over time, you can systematize these cultural practices. The huge difficulty here is, in this completely virtual community sort of time, we don't have the body language to necessarily see when people feel shut down, or to see when people's temperature is rising. So, we need a lot more creativity here. Like, can we leverage memes and GIFs on all sorts of animations and things like that when we're having online dialogues to help people get across tone? I think there's some degree of like ritualization of a lot of these practices that will become necessary over time. And they have already, like in certain communities, you can see the ritualized usage of different memes in order to communicate things. And it's a very in-group type of communication, but what's wrong with that, really? So returning to the case of Mega Shark versus Mega Octopus, it appears that Mega Shark really likes conflict. You can see that he's picking a new target in all these different movies, and Giant Octopus has gone back to his cave, and people are happy that maybe Giant Octopus was the problem, but actually it kind of looks like Mega Shark is kind of a jerk. Like, I'm not even sure that Mecha Shark is a real thing. Like, maybe he was just built in order to like reassert Mega Shark as the top dog around here. So you have to recognize that psychotic people actually do exist, and that sometimes people really are problematic, which is a complicated concept, but that's why this is only one slide long. But you really do have to recognize that there are about 10% of the population that are legitimately psychopathic and will try to assert power just by making trouble. Finally, we always get to define, again, this is about conscious choices, we get to define what these conflicts mean to us. I really like these tattoos, and I found quite a few of them, like people having really, really traumatic incidents in their lives, and the way that they reframed them using this particular imagery, I thought that was really perfectly emblematic. But your community, no matter how big or small the conflicts, it's really important to use storytelling to reframe, what does this mean for you? What did you learn? And you get to choose what you learn. There's no there's no perfect answer to what you're going to learn from that conflict. There's only the question of what is right for that community in terms of what are the outcomes that we want. So that's it. That's my little talk. And I am hoping to talk more about the conflicts and the concepts and whatever else you guys want to talk about from here on out. Let me unshare my screen. Hello.
Naomi, the world. There's so much to say. I'm gonna hold my tongue until if anybody else wants to say anything, because I'm gonna ramble forever.
Let me just take a second to welcome in fellow Jitster here. Hello, fellow Jitster. I don't know what your name is.
It says Thomas.
Oh, hey,
Hi,
Thomas.
everybody.
Great.
Howdy.
When did you jump in?
Maybe 10 minutes ago.
Oh, cool. All right, so you got to see some of that, the slides and everything. Awesome. So why don't we just do since it's a small group, why don't we do like a small round of introductions and then just have a conversation? So yeah, go ahead. Why don't you start, Dustin?
Go. You're the host. You start. I thought everybody knew you. Sorry.
I was just jumping in to fill the gap that I perceived. You start.
My name is Dustin. Disclaimer, I had a TBI in July, so I ramble a lot, and I'm working on that. I have been on the West Coast for a couple of years now and have a background in tech bro bullshit in a pharma perspective, and I like thinking about stuff like this. So this is really fascinating to me, and I took some notes on her talk, and I want to share with people and want to hear you guys' input as well.
Great. Who's next?
I'm David Campbell. I practice Chinese medicine in Portland, Oregon. Yeah, I heard about this talk through a Zoom meeting associated with the Future Fossils podcast, which is an awesome podcast. And yeah, I was curious to learn more about it.
Welcome. Thomas.
All right, let me hit the right button. I'm in Providence, Rhode Island, although Austin, Texas, Asheville, and New Orleans feel much more like home. Been here almost 4 years in Providence. And in Asheville, studied a ton of nonviolent communication. I was doing a lot of community work and spent about 10 years working to build an eco village and went bankrupt and had a baby instead. And yeah, now I work with mobile home park co-ops all across New England and get to practice a weird, wonderful variety of conflict, community facilitation skills. But we also just kind of help people with their infrastructure and just kind of day-to-day nuts and bolts stuff. So it's, yeah. So yeah, I both remain super optimistic and super cynical about communication as a tool for keeping our species alive.
I think that's a very rational response. Maintaining some degree of cynicism is probably totally important. This is my cat Minnie, and she's actually the star of the show. She needs to tell you. Here, wait, let me see her. There we go. Oh,
I find her very avoidant.
She's anxious of. Well, I don't know. Something bad happened to her when she was a kitten, and so like we got her with a very crooked tail, and it's adorable because it pokes straight up, like it goes down like a cat's tail, and then it goes to like this 90-degree angle straight up. But anyway, something very bad happened to her as a kitten, and fortunately she's not afraid of people as a result of it. She just can't stand not being pet all the time. So here she is. She's the queen of the house, basically. She keeps herself very clean.
So Naomi, I really liked your talk. First of all, I really, really liked it.
Thanks.
Have been hard on this bent personally, and like my own little zealot pulpit has been about, not being adversarial and approaching things more collaboratively, because so much of our world is so adversarial. But I really liked the way you framed this as like, hey, this is useful shit too. And it kind of reminds me of some other things that you've done, Brave Space Style and that sort of thing.
Yeah, all that stuff goes
it
together
made me think of, yeah, for sure, absolutely. I can see how it dovetails. And when you were talking, it gave me the idea of like 2 Home Depot buckets is what I thought of. I thought of conflict and collaboration as these 2 different buckets, and that the conflict bucket makes itself by itself. Conflict happens the moment you notice something you would call a problem or a challenge or whatever. That's internal, and that bucket appears before you. The collaboration bucket requires mutual alignment. It says, oh, hey, we're going to work on this project together, or we're going to work on this challenge together. Both buckets, I think, are kind of necessary. If there's a conflict button, you got to have a collaboration button to get there without harm, And I had this in my head. It was like the idea of keeping a balance between being on the rim of both of those buckets. So when I recognize that I have a conflict, now I, like you said, notice this, right? Even if that's personal internal conflict, if you can notice that, that's huge before it's in the open. Now, if I notice this and I say, okay, I have this problem with Naomi, now I can come to you and say, hey, Naomi, here's this challenge that I've noticed, and it's given me some conflict, and I want to collaborate with you on how we can, move past it or whatever. And that gives me the opportunity to say, here's my conflict button. I'm going to like give some venti feelings and thoughts here, but I'm also holding on to this and saying, look, I'm not throwing this at you. I'm just putting this out here in the room, and we can play with it and poke at it. I want to be in the collaboration bucket here.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to say, look, you really pissed me off and you were a bitch about this. But that's maybe my inability to use better words in this moment, but I'm trying to not throw it at you.
Mm-hmm.
So how can we collaborate, right? Like, so by keeping a balance on this cadence to like toggle between jumping into our conflict and then jumping out of it, that feels really useful. I don't know. It's what got me thinking about.
Yeah. I like
because
that.
I feel like it's easy when you have a conflict, if you want to confront it like actively, then if you get your head into it too much, it's like you put blinders on. We can very easily lose our scope and lose our grip on the life raft, so to speak. That collaboration bucket, we lose it and we're just adrift.
Yeah, I think, and most importantly, as far as what I can see, as soon as the more the temperature ratchets up, I'm using more Home Depot references. I feel like you end up with people falling into their normal pain dealing problems or patterns. So the attachment styles comes into play. People who are anxious avoidant, people who are more securely attached, like all that stuff kind of shows up no matter what type of relationships that you're dealing with.
So I posted a little link in the chat to a very short article I wrote for that because I was trying to get this concept across to a lot of my patients, which is that negative emotions have to be felt in order to be processed. Mm-hmm. And a lot of our, say, negative behaviors, like things that we want to change but don't seem to be able to, are driven by these emotions that have been basically repressed because we're unwilling to fully feel them. And, it's something, some people call it shadow work or, different things. I learned a lot about it through reading about the Sedona method. And I kind of created my own little ritual around it that I like to share with people. So that's in the link if you want it. But it's basically like learning how to feel your emotions can release you from that reactive state. And because once you've felt it, it then integrates and you're no longer in that sort of like acute, excited phase where you might say something mean and create a bigger conflict than you need to. And then the other thing I think you were mentioning is keeping perspective, like remembering the sort of larger picture and your goals that you're looking to try to attain so that you're not, narrowing your view of your life down to just this like battle,
right.
And it helps to contextualize that.
There's a ton of good stuff in what everybody has been saying, like in a very short time span. And I'm like really excited. And I'm like, oh my God, I should have been writing these notes. I want to return to X, Y, and Z. Like I'm really excited about stuff that everyone's shared so far. One thing that sticks out to me about what you just said is the importance. There is a community and also a global importance to people being able to recognize their own feelings. That I think now that we have a couple of people who I know from Game B in the room, I'm even more happy to say that I think that Game B doesn't succeed without people really being able to dig into how their nervous system works for them and to do the work, whatever, shadow work or meditation or whatever, like some people might call it spirituality and some people might just call it personal growth work or whatever. Because if you don't know how you show up, if you don't know your own little like trigger patterns and things like that, then you're just going to kind of go out and trigger other people's patterns. And it's very hard for everyone to progress as a community and, as a global community, if people aren't doing the internal work. Leaving a gap for other people to jump in.
I really like all of this a lot. This is super useful and resourceful to me. And I'm sorry, I think your name was David?
Yes.
Yeah, like I really appreciated what you were saying about negative feelings needing to be felt to be processed. You know, that's really relevant and salient. And you want to be able to like deal with conflict. You have to feel it. You don't want to be driven by it. And I think that's important. The kind of the things about noticing what's happening. You know, like this is all just feels very, very useful to me. And I like the format that we've got here. You know, the fact that I can like jot down these notes right here makes it really easy for like what Naomi was just saying about like, I should be taking notes. Yeah. And it's easier to do in a Jitsi meeting than it is to do if we're hanging out in the living room.
Nice. Hey, Sharon. Sharon, before you got here, we did some very brief introductions. Do you want to?
Yeah, sorry, and I don't want to interrupt the flow here at all. It sounds like you're having a great discussion. So I was feeling bad about lurking invisibly.
No, it just seemed like the right time to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I am loving what I have heard. I just flipped over and scrolled really quickly through those slides, and I kind of wish I had seen that because there's lots of interesting visuals there I like to look. But
well, I'm live streaming this so that it's recording on YouTube, so you can return to it.
Right. Oh, good. Great. Yeah, I think I think what you're talking about is critical. I've been working in emotional intelligence for 17 years, so yeah, I have said in the past that I think every policy and procedure in an organization is the scar tissue of a conversation that should have happened and didn't. And I think that's you know, being a lot more comfortable and capable with conflict is something pretty essential for everybody.
Right.
Yeah.
What I'm particularly interested in is the almost invisible scar tissue, where people start feeling kind of generally bad about their community, about how things are functioning, about the types of conversations that they're able to have, whereas everything used to be better when, like 2 years ago, for example, or everything used to be better when the founders were here, and now it's all somehow terrible, even though everyone else around me doesn't seem to understand what, doesn't see what I see. I think that is one of those things where it's really hard to. I'm now able to notice when people are trying to have a conversation about why the community discussion doesn't feel good, when they're starting to point to like, well, everything would have been better if we hadn't, if before we took in X, Y, and Z member or something like that. And then the conversation, it ends up being a conflict about one person, when really it's a conversation about, well, we never actually reframed our story after such and such a thing happened. We tried to pretend like something didn't happen when it clearly did.
Right. Yeah, and I think we also try to point to a single turning point. I think we're kind of linear beings, right? So we don't deal naturally with complexity, and so we forget to look at the slow accretion of everybody's little pile onto that. All of the tacit agreements not to talk about it, not just that it happened and we didn't talk about it, but I contributed to that, and everybody contributed to that. It wasn't. There was no single turning point, and
right.
Yeah.
Well, that's why scapegoats are so great. Let's make sure we can find a scapegoat for the problem so that no one else has to feel uncomfortable.
Right. Right.
Yeah, it does require a lot of work to ask the right questions to dig in. I think it's really easy to like look at the big house on fire and say, well, the problem is the house on fire, not the gas leak and the sparklers that started it.
Well, yeah. I mean, those are all issues, and there are people behind those issues, right?
Right.
Some of those people might be beloved. Like, grandma left the gas leak on. I don't want to talk to grandma about leaving the gas on.
Right. And incorporating like part of shadow work isn't just like everything will be okay if we just like, make peace and make a stuffed animal out of our shadows. Like there's also actual grief work involved. Like we can't death is not going to go away. Tragedy is not going to go away. So it's an interesting piece as well. Like, just as far as like, if the timeline is busted and our organization goes bankrupt, like that's a real possibility. And like, we can grieve that. I was on a call this morning that I kind of snuck into on our nonprofit, and anybody's welcome on it, but it's like kind of the executive part of the board, and seeing it was just like, like hearing people express time urgency, and it's like, okay, time urgency was a real part of the dynamic there, right? And like, I feel like I spend a lot of my political capital kind of voicing up and allowing myself to like play like a little bit of the token asshole, but I feel like I can do that because of my role and my position, and I don't have enough power or management to like need to take flack for it. So it's like, okay, I'll do that, and then like I can step back and I'll like kind of scapegoat myself just to kind of speak what's in the room, where it feels like other people have just enough power and authority where they don't want to trip over themselves and say the wrong thing because they're trying to follow this very collaborative process. We follow something called collab, which is like modified sociocracy. So like, we were talking about hiring our super part-time CFO person into like a more of a full-time CFO, but we're not sure if they can take it because of the other obligations in their life. And, so, I kind of spoke up, and they were saying, well, we should bring them on for 30 hours instead of 20 hours, and kind of spoke up in a kind of a dick-like move of saying like, look, like it's insane to bring them on at 30 hours. Like the budget impact is too great. It's just not necessary. And I was like, then I was like, okay, and I'm going to step out just wanted to voice that because I felt like nobody was carrying that torch of that. So it just kind of led with my shadow in a little bit of a way. And then, thankfully the container of the group was such that they were able to kind of metabolize it and repeat it back. And we're like, well, like that wasn't, really part of the process, but we want to hear a little bit of what you're saying, or at least one person did, and they made space for that. And then they were able to move on. But it just felt like everyone else was trying to be so considerate that it was kind of in between asshole and shadow, and it was just like saying too safe.
Yeah.
But especially when we're in like a perspective where it's like, oh, time is of the essence, but like time is so of the essence, but we don't want to get it wrong either. That it's like, okay, well, what's the grief work involved? Can we say like, okay, we're not going to meet our time deadline. Can we grieve that as a group and like be like, okay, what's our learning from that, rather than just kind of being stuck between the two. I think that happens with parenting or just all sorts of things where there's, it's not sure who's owning that responsibility, who's getting it done, and how can we express disappointment without scapegoating one another.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff in there. Wow.
I mean, to some degree, life is sort of shaped by disappointment, and because ultimately the unavoidable mortality of every person is sort of like the ultimate disappointment, right?
Are you saying we're all gonna die?
Yeah. And this, I think it's
what a
an
downer.
archetype that really helps me. Well, I'm sorry, Thomas is your name, right? I totally identify with what you're talking about. I've had to try to like bite my tongue in a lot of situations because I want to bring up the stuff that's really uncomfortable, like I just did. And I think about a lot of times like the Pluto archetype, because Pluto rules death, but he also rules transformation and rebirth. And if you're not willing to go into the darkness, you're not going to find, the thing you need to be the new, greater form.
Yeah. Growth happens.
You have to surrender.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's something there about just the. You're talking about death and rebirth, and and even on a much smaller scale, I think separating or going in different ways. Something about conflict. There's conflict about process, and there's conflict about preference and all sorts of things like that. But there's conflict at the sort of values level, at the this is important versus that is important, or and sometimes those things aren't reconcilable. And the best thing to do in those situations is to go in different directions, separate and go in different directions. And it is a little bit like a death, because most people are in whatever it is they're in, whatever container they're in, because they hoped it would create something. And to be able to say, no, I'm not going to be able to do that here with these people in this context, is kind of then you're back to square one. You're back to having to begin again, be born again in that struggle of what you want to create. So that's something I think doesn't get a lot of attention. We make it wrong to separate, not just in relationships, but in business and in partnerships and
right. Well, it feels like loss because it is. By the way, is somebody on using their laptop microphone and speaker? Because I can hear a lot of echo.
I'll mute just in case.
Cool. So, gosh, I just popped my stack. I'm actually just I'm so I'm full of a whole lot of things that people have said so far. I really should have been taking notes, but I'm also trying to pay attention to people's faces at the same time. Oh gosh, if anybody wants to jump in, then I'll remember my thought. Sorry.
I mean, I feel like I could write a whole book around all the things that we've discussed around here. There's, this is profoundly useful to me personally for lots of reasons, and maybe it is for other people as well, because we all have conflict and we all have opportunities for collaboration, and we all have challenges to overcome, both, with ourselves existentially and with each other. The kind of conflict matters here. The way we handle, internal conflict versus the way we handle interpersonal conflict. The social expectations around it too, I find, are just
I remember
worth
what
questioning.
I remember what I was going to say.
What's that?
I said I remember what I was going to say, but you finish your thought. Oh, okay. So
I would just I was thinking my final thought was, it was hard to attack someone with a question. I mean, sure, it's possible, but approaching things from a curious perspective makes that conflict way easier to handle, in my opinion.
Yeah, curiosity is essential. It's the stages of grief. That's what I wanted to talk about. So it's hard to, the socialization of the concept of people leaving a community, or people or a community dying, or for example. Bye, Susan. Or Sharon. We don't really have a lot of words or a lot of acceptance around the idea that it's okay when you lose your job, or it's or a community died, and now how do we talk about it? A lot of times, especially, so I'm in San Francisco, and we have lost numerous art communities along the way around the past 15 years, basically just completely decimated, just all these different places that I remember I moved here in 2005, and you would walk down through the Mission, and there's every other block there's an art community living in a warehouse, and now most of those places are basically just gone. Landlords would kind of just not renew their leases, holding out for better, economically speaking. And so all these different art collectives have essentially died, and we don't really have a language around grief for the death of community, for the death of a place. Not in the same way, we don't really hold funerals for communities, for example. And so people experience, because we're such storytelling creatures, we give avatars to communities, we give avatars to companies, for example. Nabisco did this, Exxon did that, right? These are entities in our minds, maybe gigantic gods and creatures or whatever, but they're still entities. And so when they move in the world, we treat them as though they are people doing things to us, or people that mean something to us. And when they die, sometimes that it leaves a gigantic hole, and we really don't recognize that. And I think that if we fail to recognize the places in our lives where we have to process grief, it leaves those sorts of holes, those permanent wounds that that Sharon was mentioning earlier, like these scars that everyone just like, that is just kind of routing around in perpetuity.
Well, I will say something that brings up for me.
Part of the answer. Oh, go ahead.
I'll just say I think that part of it is she was talking about regulations and, you know, what is our nation state other than a law producing machine, really? And maybe that's all it is producing like more and more scar tissue until the whole system is so restricted that it fails. And I personally think we're in the process of figuring out what will replace the nation state system, and its futility in the face of this pandemic is laying that out for us even a little bit more starkly.
That's awesome. Sorry, laws as scar tissue is such an interesting frame because I have been trying to figure out, like, how do you reverse a policy that is not serving people? There are a lot of policies that don't serve people, like bonfires on Ocean Beach. Like they, you know, there's a certain there's a cutoff time. Like you have to put out a fire at 9 p.m., which I think is absurdly early. Like it's just a waste of the firewood to put out your fire at 9 p.m. But I think that the policy comes about because they don't want people basically camping there, and they don't want homeless people treating the beach as their home. But I don't know that we need to be that heavy-handed about it, but I don't know how you even approach that particular policy. That's just the first one that came to mind.
I really like this a lot because I agree. Like that's kind of my sort of personal anarchist core is that, you know, law, like a bad law is the worst fucking thing that there is. And a law is an admission of failure. You know, it's like we didn't design this properly, so we're going to make a rule that you have to do it this way instead.
Right. Or it's a failure of human nature.
And yeah, I think that anytime we're saying, hey, right. But like anytime we're getting together and saying, hey, we need to make a rule about this. We need to have a rule here. All right, let's re-examine the policy attached to it. You know, does the policy just need to be better? What is the gap that has created this scar tissue, or the scar, or the damage, the wound that we will need to, you know,
right? What was the
scar
wound?
tissue to bandage up?
Right.
And I think policy review is something we don't really do. Like we treat the Constitution as something as sacred. And what I personally believe right now would be amazing for the status quo to continue. Not that I want it to, but if it were a constitutional amendment that recognizes the need for the government to provide for public health in a comprehensive fashion. But that is like changing the Bible. There's no one that wants to take that on because they know the conflict is so great. Like the framers could not have possibly imagined. They didn't know what germ theory was. They didn't know what viruses were. They didn't know how to, the idea of public health, the guy that comes and gives you bloodlettings, like this was not, you know, they had the humors. And so like they recognized it was an imperfect document. That's why they had the amendment system set in there in the first place. But now we treat this all as so holy that even parts of it that are clearly not serving us, that's the key there. I think it's the framing of good and bad, framing of right and wrong, you know, good and evil. These are not really useful ways to look at this. Is this serving you? Does this work in 2020 in an internet connected society? No, what we need is public health. That makes sense. We should add that in. It seems pretty obvious given the circumstances around, but because of the conflict framing around it, no, that'll never happen.
Yeah, I'm working on a novel that it takes place between 1861 and 2101, and it is exactly tries to be in the nexus of that conflict of saying like the nation state's become obsolete, but it's still fighting for its existence. At the same time, you know, it doesn't mean it's necessarily even a progressive thing because part of the people that it's fighting against, you know, some are the crypto anarchists and some of them are the, you know, the transnational corporations who are taking on the role of the nation state. Like, you know, it's never, utopia, you know, on the horizon, but it's not, it's not a life raft. It's not a free pass, right? But it's
I mean, the World Trade Organization has a lot more power than the UN. Think about that.
Oh, for sure. But or like pointing out law as a scar tissue is just really beautiful. Just think about like, as certain entities are unable to respond, right? If you're like unable to metabolize the grief, if you're unable to metabolize and be dynamic and take on feedback loops, that energy is going to go somewhere else, right? Like in theory, like part of the reason California was so progressive was because it was founded after New York, like they were able to be more responsive to the technologies at hand. And now like they're not able to keep up with the changing technology, the nexus of legislation, technology, or whatever. So where is that creative energy going to go that needs to grieve and needs to be creative? And we just don't know. We have ideas, like what you guys are pointing at.
I was listening to I tuned in every once in a while to the Long Now's Long Conversation yesterday. I don't know if you guys were aware of that. They were basically they have a conversation as relay race, essentially. So some person talks to the first person, and then that second person goes in and starts a conversation with a third person, and then the third person starts a conversation with a fourth person. And so they're like kind of like tag teaming the conversation all the way to the end. And one of the things that came up, and this was just kind of like this almost like liminal dreamlike talking in the background of my day, was the concept of like cities with metabolic that you could evaluate in sort of a metabolic way. Like, the pandemic, what it's done is suppress the metabolism. Like we all need to basically just be taking naps, not just individually speaking, but like society really needs a nap. Which, by the way, I say this only semi-facetiously. This is why I think Biden is winning.
Well, and maybe Mother Earth needs us to take a nap.
What'd you say?
Maybe Mother Earth needs us to take a nap.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to go as far as to say like, oh, this is, the virus is us, and coronavirus is here to like save the day. I feel like that's a bridge too far in terms of my conceptualization of what's going on. But I think it is useful to frame it in like we've created a whole lot of wounds, and we're trying to just route around the damage, like in terms of like creating efficiencies for the whole world. And a lot of those efficiencies are shooting us in the foot, and we just need to basically just kind of just sit, not be efficient for a while.
Although telecommuting through video is more efficient than driving in.
That is ironically true.
Ironically true.
Well, the thing that has stood out to me most about this great reshuffling, as I have been taking to calling it, is that we now, in this period of our time, have more time available to us than we've ever had in our entire adult lives, and very likely more time than we will ever have again. The structure of our lives has opened up a lot of time, and that is very valuable. Capitalist society does not really want to give you much of that. And so this will get swallowed up very quickly. It's right now, a lot of people are figuring out, what do we do now with this time? What matters to me? Does Netflix matter so much anymore? Like the choices in media consumption are changing globally. So this is going to have its own ripple effects. Our time is very precious. And I think that if nothing else, the one of the benefits of this entire pandemic has been that everyone in every context I have seen has increased their value on the preciousness of interpersonal communication. I mean, how many of you would get meetings for work that you got invited to, conference calls, and they were optional attendance? Would you go to an optional attendance one? Maybe sometimes. Maybe
You're breaking up a bit.
We're all on a video. Apology, just to say that like we're voluntarily interacting now in ways that we would optionally not do usually. And so we're just figuring out how to do things better, and I appreciate the time that we're being given to do it.
I think we should also be careful, though, to realize that that time is not evenly distributed. That there are numerous people, like ironically, us, the essential services type of people who still have jobs where they have to leave their homes and come back exhausted, that have not gained much in the way of time for reflection, and probably have just only.
No, that's true. I'm saying this as an
gained in terms
unemployed
of
person,
anxiety.
so that's a different thing.
Oh, I know. It's
Yeah.
It's a reminder to myself just as much as I'm saying it to you guys, because it's so easy to forget that what this is going to do, what this situation is going to do, is exacerbate the divide between rich and poor. Because I mean, at least in this country, the United States, 45% of people under 40 lost their jobs. 45% of people under 40 are now either unemployed or just don't have enough, or underemployed. And a $1,200 one-time check is not going to cut it.
Even the possibility of 4 months of unemployment with the extra $600 a week, it's like, yeah, that'll get people through 4 months. What happens at that point?
Yeah.
Well, my hope is that the flat pack guillotine will cost less than that stimulus check.
Oh.
I would, I am honestly, sincerely a little bit nervous and concerned about the potential for civil unrest and violence.
Yeah.
I don't really want that. It may be necessary. But if it does come down to that, I would rather it be the symbolic sort of violence of, hey, let's go French Revolution style with this, rather than let's go Rodney King style. You know what I mean?
So I would use that to bring it back to the sort of like the
terrible in all sorts of ways and problematic.
But you're not the only one saying it, so I'm going to take you as representative, as opposed to just a problematic individual, Dustin.
Yes.
To bring it around to like the focus of this conversation, to use the, like, what about those guillotines? I saw somebody made this meme of like a IKEA flat pack of a guillotine, which was super hilarious. It's got like instructions in IKEA iconography. But that is a thing that people are feeling, and it's because here's this conflict that most people feel they have absolutely no control over, and it's worsening, and like there's a disproportionate impact, particularly on people who were already feeling the brunt of economic disadvantage, and everyone across the globe is grieving in some way. And you could see it like within a week of shelter in place in San Francisco, for example. A lot of the hackerspace communities were immediately like, okay, how do we 3D print all the things that the medical world might need? How do we make masks? How do we make all these sorts of things? Like we need to help. We need to help. But the thing is that they were actually creating conflicts with certain people in a certain way, by number one, being so forceful in their like insistence that we keep the hackerspace open, that they weren't willing to hear other people's concerns about leaving the hackerspace open. And the other one was that they weren't actually in connection with anybody in the medical community, and didn't actually know what anybody needed. So all these sort of like fervent DIY efforts, not all of them, but I mean, in general, there was sort of a bargaining energy that people had felt the anger. They'd probably watched the news. They'd been through the, possibly like there's the shock, there's the denial, there's the anger at what's happening. And then you move on to bargaining. And the bargaining energy was so strong that people were really willing, and they couldn't recognize it in themselves. They're like, I'm just trying to help, right? They couldn't recognize that they were actually running roughshod over each other. And I have this in meeting notes at Noisebridge. Like there's a history of people's need to bargain with the world in order to assert control, in order to feel a sense that they have some impact on the world in this like completely helpless feeling time. And actually, because they don't recognize that that's what they're trying to do for themselves, causing more conflicts. And I'm going to stop there because I was talking for quite a while. I do want to ask you guys, like, what, especially since we're in a very small group, there's an opening for talking about what we're experiencing personally, like within our own groups. And maybe it can be like prior to the pandemic, since the pandemic has almost homogenized a lot of the types of conflicts that we're experiencing. But, you know, Thomas, I heard a little bit about, you know, you moderate certain types of communities where you live, you know, help possibly sometimes to be the asshole in the room who's willing to say the uncomfortable thing. And I wonder if you have any, if there are any situations that you want to talk about specifically when it comes to patterns of conflict that are either handled poorly or handled better.
Are you talking generally, or you mean specific within our new weird world that we're in?
Either way, whatever comes to mind for you.
I've been really lucky in the last month. I work with 9 communities, and as far as I can tell, that they're handling it well, and they're all fortunate. I think most of them are on fixed incomes and in the retirement space, or at least like working part time and getting some Social Security. That's certainly not the case for a lot of my colleagues. And we work with about 50 communities across New England, and I have about 9. So
that's amazing. That's a lot of people. Like, how many people does that represent?
I can tell you, I'm doing the budget for one of them right now, and I can tell you our data page. Nationwide, we're a group of affiliates, started in New Hampshire. Nationwide, there's 257. Most of those are in New Hampshire because they started there in the 80s. So of that 257, that's 17,414 home sites.
Wow.
So, you know, maybe double that number of people, you know, if people living 1, 2, or 3 to a home. Yeah. So the most are New Hampshire, followed by Massachusetts, and then, yeah, I think Oregon.
Do they all use, you mentioned a style of community decision making. You're saying, like, I think it was like socionics.
Sociocracy. Yeah, that's for our nonprofit. So our nonprofit does one thing that's, you know, more hippied out. And then the communities we work with follow parliamentary procedure, or Robert's rules.
Right.
And I've actually learned to really respect that as like a way to move things forward when people can get into it. So it's been a learning lesson for me, being like, oh, not all things that are old and dusty are useless, you know. So it's been helpful to learn those rules. I mean, yeah, I guess one of my life struggles is, like, you know, it feels like there's these tropes going around that are kind of at odds, other ends of the spectrum. And one is like, oh, give people a chance to learn their own lessons and they'll like come around to it. And then the other one of being like, okay, there's damage being had, we need to intervene to prevent things from really going off the rails. Right. So my personal take on it is, like, the world is changing so fast that if you have information that can keep people from wasting their time and having to reinvent the wheel, by all means do that. Like, you know, there's places where people need to grind the axe, and like there's only things that they can internalize and build up muscle memory themselves. But a lot of the ways that people say they just need to learn it themselves, it actually seems kind of like schadenfreude, or like they're inflicting damage on people just because they were damaged, like passing down generational trauma or something.
Sure.
So I find myself frequently like intervening when other people are like, oh, they'll figure it out. I'm like, no, that's just cruel. Like, so one of the things that comes up in our work is we teach people to use their bylaws, to use them, edit them, you know, update them and follow them, so that they have a clear process, and like the democratic parts of that process of who makes the proposal, how do you submit it. Like the lender's like a democratic affordable housing based nonprofit, so they need to approve the bylaw changes to make sure that they're not violating, they're not becoming undemocratic and like approving dictatorial measures. But oftentimes, of course, the community feels like the lender's overstepping by doing that, right? They're trying to maintain democracy, but they're like, oh, why do you have this outside control? So it's an interesting thing of good guy, bad guy there.
What do you find? So you said there's a nationwide network of people who are following parliamentary procedure, right?
Yeah, so these are all trailer parks. They're all mobile home communities. So those are the people who get this type of lending, and they become owners. They become co-op owners. But as written into the loan agreement is they have to follow parliamentary procedure.
Got it. Are you close enough to how they communicate with each other that you would be able to do you have perceptual differences between like the different cultures where these people are embedded?
Yeah. Yeah. There's all different types. I mean, there's, relatively wealthy people. There's people who like have had hard scrap lives their whole lives. There's many different cultures. It's overwhelmingly, white working class as like a rule, but there's a lot of variance and outliers within that for sure. That
is amazing for you to, like, just as a human being, to be able to have that sort of sensory network that you can touch into. Because there are all sorts of questions that I could ask you about, like, well, in this particular region of the world, where people are locally more likely to vote blue than red, how do people kind of solve X, Y, and Z issue? Like I could probably make a matrix of questions to ask you. Okay, so like when people are arguing over property
right.
and they're in Wyoming, what happens?
Yeah, that'd be pretty awesome point. So many of our other states have not a lot of communities yet, just because they haven't been around as long. But yeah, I love that kind of opportunity for sense making for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Hey, there's a person that I haven't heard from yet.
Hi. Bentley. I'm Bentley.
Hey.
I was just listening and I missed your initial presentation. I looked over the slides real quick. But it did kind of bring up, I was just listening to you talk with Thomas, and Thomas, I don't know if what was interesting about this conversation is I work on software to help with conflicts, which there's a lot of flavors out there, but I'm trying something slightly different. And I don't know if Thomas, if you know if those communities are ever looking for stuff like that. It would be it would be outside the parliamentary procedures, but and just if anyone else is looking for that. I'm sorry?
Or you're different on your own?
I'm sorry, you're breaking up.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Do you know Richard Bartlett? I think he works with Lumio, those people, for decision making.
Yeah, I've spoken to them. Okay,
but you're in separate organizations. Unfortunately, the short answer is that most of our communities are very technically challenged. Average age 65 to 75, or folks who are very working class and are using technology mostly for entertainment, but not as part of their day to day. That's definitely rapidly changing in the 4 years I've been here. Like it's people are teching up for sure, but yeah, and this crisis is encouraging people to tech up some more to stay connected. But as far as like using a more sophisticated thing right now, like putting in an attachment in an email is like high tech for a lot of my clients. So yeah, that's kind of some of
yeah. I mean, the hope is that eventually these tools would get down to that level of simplicity, but yeah, most of them, including mine, are a ways off.
Yeah, but I'd love to. Definitely be interested in chatting with you about it if you have the bandwidth for it and seeing where it's at. I'm not sure if it'll be applicable to this particular passion of mine, but just it sounds really great.
Yeah, I'd love anyone who is willing to talk to me about it. I'll chew your ear off. So,
where are you based out of?
Dallas, Texas.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'm from Round Rock near Austin originally.
Okay,
yeah. What link did you use to get into this talk?
Game B.
Oh, cool.
The event, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, so we have a Noisebridge Philosophy Guild member, Dustin, and we have David from Future Fossils. We had a previous person in here, Sharon, who is also a Game B person. So I definitely tried to reach out the most to Game B because I was, I don't know if you were paying attention to the last couple of, last week or so of posts in Game B, but there's this ongoing conflict that I'm perceiving between the conspiracy theorists, or at least people who don't want to be known as conspiracy theorists, but who kind of are, and people who are just kind of tired of the poor signal to noise ratio in the Game B group, and a whole lot of hand wringing over like what to do about it. Sort of a Paradise Lost kind of situation.
Yeah, I've been visiting the main Game B site less and less because the signal to noise has been there, and I just haven't had the energy to engage. Although, I do work in conflict and in misinformation, so that would be a great
well, no, so you
source.
know exactly what it would take, probably, like the energy investiture that would be required to fix it.
Right. And well, the tool I'm building is to reduce the energy expenditure to correct or to handle those type of conversations. But I don't have the energy to work on any particular ones because I'm so busy trying to work on the kind of explainer thing that would take all this, and I'm handling some other people that I know that are in that same ilk of things that the average person would call conspiracy theories. So yeah, I've just kind of reached my limit on trying to fix that particular issues, but it is my passion and my chosen career. So
what is the software that you work on?
So right now I call it Reason Score. It's still very, very experimental. So I'm not saying that it would work, but the idea is that it helps kind of categorize and organize all the reasons for and against a particular piece, which could be something like, the government. There's lizard people in the government that are controlling and manipulating everything. So that could be, the debate topic. And then it because a lot of the biases and algorithms that our brains use to make decisions, it helps with some of those by organizing the information, and it also creates a scoring system that helps people understand and encourages people to it helps people understand other people's positions and why they are there, and then it helps them build kind of a community understanding, but it's still kind of early. So it's really more of an experiment than anything else.
Interesting. I could talk at length about conflicts that I've seen over years and years and years in my communities, and the sort of influences that drove me to make this like a focus of attention. But I'm more interested in hearing from other people about sort of like problematic patterns, a lot, especially the really wicked problems.
Those seem like two pretty different things. Problematic patterns is like in community interaction, like in the Game B space where
not necessarily in Game B. I just mean in just especially like in-person communities that people have been involved with. I'll tell you, for example, one of the sort of wicked problems that we've had in the anarchist hackerspace is how do we talk about our history so that we don't repeat the same mistakes? A large part of what happens in a hackerspace, especially an anarchist one where everyone's a volunteer, is that you get a fairly high attrition rate whenever there's a conflict, where people just don't want to invest the time to try to solve the problem, and quite rightfully so. Like, they've got problems in their own lives, and it's hard to see what the benefit of sticking around is if it's really causing you a lot of struggle. So you go through a conflict, you lose a whole bunch of people that have been there for, either a short time or a long time or whatever. And then in the aftermath of that, you get the whoever's left behind either deciding to not tell the story because it was too painful, or in my case, try to tell the story to as many people as possible. What happens when I try to tell the story of what happens is that I'm, generally speaking, the only person who's willing to talk about it, or one of very few people who's willing to talk about it, because it's painful. And it's really hard to talk about what just happened, like the nuclear bomb that just went off in your community, without naming people, without saying like, well, you know, these things happened and then this other happened, and I'm only one person and I'm not going to get it right, and I have my own biases as well. So the wicked problem that I have been trying to solve is, for one thing, how do we get ahead of conflicts so they don't turn into basically just like these huge attritions? But also, how do we create the right storytelling? And it has to be collaborative storytelling, to turn those wounds into something that actually helps us remember how we got into those problems in the first place.
I really think ritual is important. We have tons of rituals in the modern world and the postmodern world. We just don't really consider them rituals usually. But I think being intentional about creating a ritual can be a very powerful process, even if you consider it, you know, merely from a rationalist, materialist viewpoint. You can use it, like you're talking about, to create a space for story making and envisioning where you're headed, because that's part of the story, is not just remembering the past, but envisioning a future that inspires people, and figuring out what is the continuity between the two, because that's where you are, you know. And I think, you know, there are some basic rituals that people use, like I mean, I love the idea of cooperative organizations, you know, but sometimes cooperatives get bogged down in the process, and sometimes, you know, that's the corporate structure that's more executive works better, just because they can move a lot more quickly. But I do think that, especially when you're talking about voluntary community, I definitely think, you know, having sort of events where, you ritualize the activity of the communication, and maybe, help transmit some things that newer people wouldn't know, but also like allow them the space to voice what inspires them.
Yeah.
And you've been working on this for a while, working with communities?
So just within one specific community, I've been working with this anarchist hackerspace for about 11 years. And I've also, this is something I said like at the beginning of my talk, but I'm happy to repeat it. Like, I've been employed as like a professional community manager in a bunch of different spaces. One of them was the Seasteading Institute, for example, which was mostly libertarians, where I got a very good understanding of the limitations of Austrian economics. Not something I was interested in, but I sure had to become conversant. And also a bodybuilding community, which I helped start, and then I had a fallout with my co-founder, and so I kind of left that world behind. But it's been useful to me to see the types of conflicts that are pretty much universal to human experience, and the sorts of emergent effects. Like, as I talked about in my talk, like when you have like two or more big monster, you know, personalities who are sort of going at it with each other, like the types of people that sort of just like fall away because they don't feel like, you know, either they don't have a dog in this fight, or it's not worth it to them, or they have enough trauma in their lives already and they're just not interested in like inflicting more pain on themselves. And these are the sorts of things, especially in male-dominated communities, where basically I spend most of my time in male-dominated communities because it just fits my style a lot better. I'm not saying that that's what I want, but I do tend to be one of the sort of like female homesteaders in mostly male communities, that people don't realize the sort of like silent fall off and loss of diversity that happens when conflict is not managed in a way where everyone feels included in the conversation.
Yeah, I'd just add to what I hope I'm pronouncing your name anywhere near close, Duir, had said about rituals. And it reminded me, I was listening to Tim Ferriss the other day on his podcast, and he talked about with his girlfriend, they get together once a week, and they used to talk about kind of things that you do that bother me. But yeah, having a consistent time or a space where people can bring up the things before they get too full. Although with the amount of time that you've been kind of thinking about this, I'm hesitant to jump into a whole bunch of ideas, because I don't know if you've run across a whole bunch yet.
You will almost certainly delight and surprise me with something.
Yeah.
So I'm inviting you to.
Okay. Well, yeah. So that's really one, having a regular kind of bitch session, but you gotta frame it right. That's hard to do without it becoming just where people get more and more involved. But a constant invitation to bring up issues before they get too large as a ritual might be something to consider in a community like that.
Mm-hmm. I think that, so if you guys are familiar with Agile methodology, I have a love-hate relationship with it, as many people in the tech world do. I'm a software engineer, by the way.
Okay.
I've also been a manager. But the concept of the retrospective helped me formalize, or like more articulate, a lot of the thoughts that I'd been having about what it takes to get people to feel comfortable to share their grievances. Because even if you say, like, you put some leadership role type person in the room and you say, okay, now everybody's telling me what's wrong with the company. It's not going to happen, right? You're going to get some like ass kissing, sort of like, yeah, well, I don't think that we chose the right color of drapes. I don't know. Whereas the concept of like a well-run retrospective is that the person, hopefully everyone sees each other as equals, and that's not always necessarily possible, but the person running it needs to express enough vulnerability in their day-to-day lives with the rest of the people in the group, such that people, when they come to the retrospective, really feel like they can share what's on their minds. And so, this gets into concepts of like servant leadership, where like the concept of leadership is not that you lord over people, but that you are there to serve other people's needs. And it's more responsibility than power. Yeah, because otherwise you won't create the safety for people to tell you what's going wrong, and then you just lose people, and you need people to get stuff done. So
yeah, and I was listening to so I guess a lot of the work that they do in businesses as far as soliciting and handling feedback is good. There's one suggestion like that you do have a kind of an open and even an anonymous or a direct feedback. Like you said, if you get everyone in a meeting, people won't generally speak up, especially if they want to talk about someone else in the meeting. But one thing that was really interesting they said is that when you get feedback and you're able to take action on it, or sometimes even if you're not, letting the whole community know, hey, we got this feedback and this is what happens, sets the example, and also lets people know that it's a safe thing to do, to give that feedback. And that goes back to your storytelling.
It also speaks to ritual, as David was pointing out.
And ritual.
Like churches have this down. For instance, like the concept of speaking your sins to a priest. Mm-hmm. You go into that little box. You are safe there to say, like, I this week I fucked up, and here's how I fucked up. It's whether you believe in the concept of like divine forgiveness or not. I think there's a lot of wisdom in the way that churches set up that ritual for people.
Related to these, and maybe I'm trying to put a square peg in a round hole, but the concept of skin in the game, I just really find applicable to so many of these community discussions about like if a community discussion isn't working, it's probably because something asymmetrical with the skin in the game of the group.
Oh my God. That is totally relevant to this. This is not square peg round hole at all. This is like, actually, it's part of my slides. And maybe I didn't like articulate it enough, but like when people like the fights between a boyfriend and a girlfriend, for example, especially when it comes to like, well, I want a kid. Well, well, shit, I don't really want a kid. Those are the nastiest. Those are like the things that break up long-lasting relationships because there's so much at stake. But yeah, the asymmetry, that's another thing. Like the people that I name as sea otters in my sort of like animal metaphor of like how people deal with conflict, they're delightful anywhere. So they'll just go find a place where the environment is good for them and play there. They don't have that sense of like of interest in trying to work out, like trying to work through the pain of the conflict.
It's an interesting like piece of where people who we oftentimes think of villains, if we're trying to like, if you're crafting like a movie script or a novel or something, you say like, well, what is the role of the villain in that? And like a way, they're upping the stakes, right? Like they're going to keep raising the stakes until people are like, oh shit, I really have skin in the game now. I better be willing to transform, right? Like you have to leave your comfort zone. And like not leaving your comfort zone is great. When you're comfortable, it's great to be comfortable. But when when there's an existential risk at play, but you're unwilling to address it because you don't feel like the stakes are high enough, there is some kind of sacred, demonology in raising the stakes for people to turn up the kettle.
Oh yeah, I mean, this is why every video game is about the princess getting abducted.
Right.
Like, why do I have to go through all this work? Oh, well, my girlfriend's being held prisoner by I guess I better do something.
Or the classic fairy tale of the kids getting eaten by a wolf in the woods, right? They're like, I'm going to tell you a story, kid. You're gonna like it because I'm taking my time out of my busy day in the 1800s to tell you a story, but you're gonna hate it because ultimately, like, it's about you getting eaten in the woods. So, listen.
Yeah. Well, predators are easy scapegoats because they kill and eat meat. But when they reintroduced wolves to Yellowstone, the entirety of Yellowstone flourished because of it. Yeah, and they had to come up with that new theory of ecology around trophic cascade to explain why the introduction of what should have been, from conventional thinking, basically a huge energy resource hog introduced to the environment actually caused it to proliferate and become more fertile, more rich. And it had to do with the fact that, well, now the grazing animals had to move. They couldn't just sit around and be comfortable. And that movement replenished the soil because they were spreading their manure. And then the replenishment of the soil allowed more plants to flourish. And then that caused the waterways to become healthier. And, the cycle was a positive feedback loop. But, our previous understandings of ecology were that basically every animal has metabolic needs, and those metabolic needs are limited by the productivity of the primary producers, basically the plants photosynthesizing. And basically you just have to limit your number of animals so that they don't go over the capacity of the photosynthesis. But that turned out to be a false assumption because we didn't understand the dynamics at play.
Totally. So what you're saying is a better economist than Marx.
Yeah.
Because Nietzsche would talk about don't worship the lamb and don't demonize the hawk.
Right. And you're saying that there's a place for assholes in communities.
Yeah.
Well, it's like if you're in the wolf pack, you're all just wolves,
Yeah.
But wolves have a different way of relating to one another than elk say. But elk, the males still fight, and it can get pretty brutal, even though they're grazing on grass mostly. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I wish I had the elegance to apply that to our economic situation. I know there's a parallel there somewhere, but I don't have the words for it.
Yeah, you can also go too far with natural metaphors. I mean, I think that the concept that humans are conscious and therefore we can choose what outcomes we want needs to be worked into our concept of natural as well, right? Like one of my biggest frustrations with working within the Seasteading Institute, because while they would constantly say that they were they didn't assert any particular political philosophy, the type of people who were drawn to the Seasteading Institute were largely libertarians with an Austrian economics kind of bent. And it all comes down to this concept of people as rational actors. And the rational actor theory denies that people have emotions or families or sentimental attachments to place. Which is just absurd.
Yeah.
In fact, I would argue that everyone is acting on emotion 100% of the time, and that I believe that our rationality is something we do after the fact to explain why we do what we do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And even greed, which they might argue, well, greed, look at that, that's mathematical. It's all about maximizing points. Yeah, to fill a void. What's that void?
Yeah.
That you have that you need to fill with all that money.
Yeah.
That's where the greed comes from.
And I think it's no accident that a lot of these economic systems that rely on a rational actor at the center of their calculations of emergent behavior in humans, or the expected emergent behavior based on paper, are male. That people who have been conditioned their entire lives to believe that they are not emotional creatures, which is also insane. Like,
it's why we still say that particles are the building blocks of reality, even though we've known for 100 years that's not true.
Mm-hmm. Right.
There are no such thing as particles.
Oh no.
The material world is fundamentally non-material.
And upon hearing this, we were all dissolved into a gray goo.
No, we just shut our minds to it because it contradicts the modernist assumption that the world is mechanical and material, and it's logical, therefore.
Right. Sure. Yeah. All models are wrong. Some models are useful.
Right.
So in 15 minutes, I'm probably going to drop off. Is there anything that you guys really want to dig into?
Well, there's something that I've been recently exploring, the cryptocurrency space a little bit I feel like very much an amateur in that space. But I found a project that I think could be pretty cool. It's called Seeds. I don't know if you're familiar with it. You can go to joinseeds.com if you're interested in checking it out. What I think is cool, it's hosted on the EOS blockchain, which I'm not super familiar, but it's supposed to be one of the better blockchains, I think more efficient or something.
Mm-hmm.
And what's cool about the Seed platform is that it's almost like a social media app. It's not just a token like so many of these cryptocurrencies. I feel like they don't really have much of a purpose other than to be traded on these markets.
Mm-hmm.
This one is actually not traded on a market. Instead, it's used as a reward for doing good work in the world, mostly focused on ecological regenerative and agriculturally regenerative work, but as well as good service work in the world. And so they're setting it up as a cooperative. So as you spend more time using it, you become more trustworthy and therefore have more of a say in what projects get funded by the seeds as they're coming to existence and therefore are able to be allocated. And I think it's a really cool model. Their idea is to sort of turn the incentives around so that, because right now, our economic system incentivizes externalizing cost, which basically means exploiting the environment and the people who you don't have to pay for. So that's why it's been so destructive. So what they're trying to do is say, what if you incentivize regenerative activity and service activity? And they're doing it through a cooperative model so that it's democratic in the way that, it's not just whoever invented it can just tell you who's getting the seeds and who's not,
So what's the origin of the energy that goes into this that is then dispersed to people doing these regenerative activities?
The source of the energy. I mean,
in the sense
individual
that, energy
participation.
is money, or money is energy.
Yeah, I mean, it's on the EOS blockchain. So however the EOS blockchain, I assume it's like most cryptocurrencies, it's running an encryption algorithm in a decentralized manner across, many devices.
Mhm.
I maybe the Seeds app is even doing some of that in the background. I'm not totally sure. I just thought, hey, this looks like what the crypto world's been promising for a long time is like a new financial system, but what they keep offering us is these like funny money assets.
Right.
So
Beanie babies.
yeah, which I'm not really interested in. So I thought it was kind of cool that maybe this is and it looks like there's a few big nonprofits that are partnering with them. So
interesting. What is it called? How would I find it?
It's you can go to joinseeds.com. Here, I'll type it in the chat.
Cool.
And if you want to find me, I'm Wild Elder Oak.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to create they have a specific way you have to create your username. It's like 12 characters and stuff. So anyways, I don't know. I'm just playing around with it to see what it's like.
Cool. Yeah, this is I feel maybe ranging off topic, maybe not, but this concept that we were talking about in the Future Fossils chat, I think a couple weekends back, of economy needing to move towards a system whereby we're kind of buying the values that we want to see more of in the world. And
yeah,
it sounds like this seed economy might be a movement towards something more like that.
Yeah, it seems like and I've been playing around with the app, and it seems to all work really well. And it's user friendly, which a lot of cryptocurrency, unless you're buying it on like Coinbase, which is pretty easy, but if you try to actually use their platforms, they're often like above my head, and I feel I'm pretty tech savvy, so I don't know you have to be like know about programming and encryption pretty well to like understand a lot of these things, which is kind of unfortunate because that's going to be a huge barrier to adoption. Whereas like Seeds is like functioning like a social media app, which we're mostly all, comfortable with.
Yeah. Even in hi Vinny. Even in an anarchist hackerspace where you would expect that crypto would there would be, just this like ecstatic embracing of crypto. There hasn't really been that. It's still not particularly compelling because I just don't think that anyone's really made the right use case yet.
Right. I mean, if you're functioning in, black or gray markets, you can do so with right now what the cryptocurrencies are offering. A friend of mine, Matthew Crawford, who I follow online quite a bit and has worked in all different parts of the financial sector and traded Bitcoin pretty well, supposedly. But I was trying to get to the bottom of why he was still bullish on Bitcoin when I just felt like the volatility is such that it's like hard to be still bullish on it. It still feels like too unpredictable. And he was saying, no, he was thinking it more as as a replacement for gold. So it's just for people who have that interest in having extra currency in gold. And it's like, clearly that's not for,
that's
scrappy of us, and not for, the 80%. That's just for the top 20%, right?
Well, I would sort of agree with Bitcoin in that sense that it is like a single Bitcoin is sort of in the price range of gold. However, you can use extreme fractions with cryptocurrencies that you couldn't do with physical objects, right? So like you can use 0.0000001 Bitcoins and actually make a transaction in a reasonable amount of money. And I would say this, Bitcoin, their blockchain is too slow to handle much transactions. But once you have Bitcoin, you can convert it into any other cryptocurrency. So it's kind of like a gateway cryptocurrency. And the Coinbase app is the only way that it makes it user-friendly enough that you can buy pretty much anything in US dollars. Any of the cryptocurrencies they offer, you can just buy them straight up in US dollars pretty easily. And then once you have those, you can use them to convert to other cryptocurrencies that aren't on their platform. And that's how, if you wanted to buy seeds, that's how I was able to. I spent $5 worth of Bitcoin and got me like 450 seeds, because seeds aren't worth very much. Just because I'm curious and just want to see how it works.
Yeah, that's interesting. Guys, thank you for showing up. I'm not necessarily ending this now. I just kind of wanted to thank you guys for bringing so many ideas and so much energy into this little discussion. And it was recorded, and I'll try to find the link as soon as this is off. And I think I have some like editing to do on like, I'm not going to edit the video. That's probably just not going to happen. But like the title and things like that in YouTube, I'm still learning the ropes on all this stuff. But feel free to share it with other people, and maybe we'll have some kind of follow-up discussion. Maybe we'll kind of shift the topic towards something more specific. I don't know. Do you guys have any ideas?
Well, I appreciate you hosting this. Is a fun little roundtable to be a part of, and your presentation was very thought-provoking. I'd be down to come back to another one.
Yeah. Ditto. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks for hosting. Appreciate it.
Cool. Thanks. Yeah. Bring others. I feel like my presentation is more of a critique and less of a like, how do we take action? Although I have some other things that I want to get into, like for instance, the power of particular forms of nonviolent communication. And also some critiques of nonviolent communication in terms of like, how do you install those in communities and things like that. Another thing that I thought would be fun to talk about was the like envisioning international relationships through the lens of like, what would ideal communication look like? Like if we can idealize communication for conflicts, for solving conflicts before they become horrible knockdown, drag out wars, what does that look like at the international level? Like it might be fun to have a model UN where we all pretend to be a country, and then we talk to each other like this. Like, it made me feel really afraid when you assassinated my general.
It could be like Settlers of Catan, Game B, not NBC style.
Yeah.
I'd love that.
Yeah, I'm really sorry for putting sanctions on your country. At the time, I thought that
sterilizing your population seemed like a great idea at the time.
Right? We were going through some stuff in our country.
Yep.
It was the I think Jermaine posted in Game B about like the all woman thing, and I don't remember if we were responding on that one or a different one, but like which countries are responding better to COVID, and like how many of them are led by women leaders.
I just put that I was eating popcorn in response. Like that's
Yeah. But I mean, just the idea that like, is Germany really the only country in the world that's done its shadow work? I mean, clearly some of the population said no. Some of the population was like, no, we don't need to do the shadow work. But, and probably a significant population part of Germany has done a fair bit of shadow work. And it's like, how does that affect them? Because they're the only large country, in that way that's like run by a woman that seems to be handling it with grace in that way. So I'm not an expert, but it's interesting.
It's one of the few countries that have been like roundly punished, I think. Like, I don't think war, like initiation of war, often goes punished.
To the same degree, right? Like, I mean, of all the different atrocities that have happened in the world, Germany's was the most severely punished, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, they were punished, but I mean, both Japan and Germany were given
That's true. Japan as well.
They were given a chance afterwards. They had the Marshall Plan and everything to like pay back stuff. Whereas, I mean, if you want to talk punishment, like look at Haiti. Like Haiti won the war against France and then had to pay France back billions of dollars over the next 100 years. It's like, no, they didn't really win that war, did they? Like, can we turn that narrative around? That's not what winning looks like.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway. Economics are much more fundamental to all of this, I think. And I think that's why, I actually, that's where I do hope that like if cryptocurrency can kind of undermine central banking, I think it'll be for the best. It hasn't come close yet, but you know,
Right.
because I do think a lot of these wars they are initiated over who owes who money, you know, and the sanctions. It's all about like, well, whether or not we're going to let you use our money or not. You know, it's like, I don't know.
You know what that brings up for me is like, when are we going to have a crypto founded space program? Like, I'm not like crazy about the space program, but I do recognize that Department of Defense is largely responsible for the internet, better or worse, right? Along with a lot of crazy, awesome engineers. But like, as it is, we need billionaires to do these huge projects. But there's so many externalities involved with that. But like, when can we have a decentralized currency of being like, hey, like, let's raise, you know, $500 billion for this awesome project. Who wants to contribute for that, you know, worldwide, and have like the contracts that can support that system? Like that would feel like a pretty robust, badass project.
Or what if we're like, who's willing to feed and house all of these engineers while they work on this project?
Right.
Rather than worrying about the dollars and cents. That's what I think we confuse sometimes. Like, we actually don't need the dollars and cents. We need the housing, we need the food, we need the healthcare to support us while we're doing something great.
True. Yeah. The proxies. All these things are proxies. Well, I'd want to respect Naomi's kind of call to wrap this up at 4 and just check in with you. Are you cool? How are you doing time-wise?
I'm totally fine. I actually felt as though kind of letting you guys know it was over started to allow you guys to talk more freely, and then it started getting interesting.
Yeah, we should probably get back to.
But I should definitely go back to work.
Yeah, I have a little more work to do. Pulling up the 4 o'clock beer.
But I will see you guys around the internets.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Cool. Adios.